In the heart of the great outdoors, where nature's tranquility often reigns supreme, two chilling tales unfold. In Whispers in the Wilderness, the park ranger's haunting. A diligent park ranger stumbles upon a horrifying secret lurking beneath the moonlit canopy, leading to a perilous encounter with a sinister cult that haunts his every step. Meanwhile, in The Lost Hours, a tale of the Appalachian abyss, a seasoned adventurer ventures into the enigmatic depths of the Appalachian Mountains, only to become ensnared in a nightmarish labyrinth where time distorts, reality blurs, and an insidious force toys with his very existence. These tales of terror and survival will transport you into the heart of the wilderness, where the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural blur, and the line between fear and reality becomes dreadfully thin. Whispers in the Wilderness, the park ranger's haunting. The moon hung low in the inky sky, casting a pallid glow over the dense forest that surrounded the remote national park. It was a night like any other for Sam, the park ranger assigned to patrol the area's vast wilderness, but little did he know that this particular night would be far from ordinary. As Sam trudged along the winding trail, his flashlight's beams slicing through the darkness, he couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was amiss. An unusual silence enveloped the forest, and the rustling of leaves underfoot seemed to echo louder than ever. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he couldn't help but shiver despite the mild autumn night. The trail led him deeper into the heart of the park, far from any signs of civilization. Sam had been a ranger for years, and he prided himself on his familiarity with every nook and cranny of the park. But tonight, the forest felt foreign, as though it were hiding something sinister in its depths. As he rounded a bend in the trail, his flashlight's beam fell upon a clearing up ahead. Sam's heart skipped a beat as he spotted a group of figures gathered around a flickering fire. He crouched behind a tree, his pulse quickening. What were they doing out here in the middle of the night? Sam squinted through the darkness, trying to make out the details of the scene before him. The figures wore hooded robes, their faces hidden in shadow. They moved with an unsettling rhythm, swaying and chanting in unison. It was a cult, he realized with a sinking feeling. He watched in horror as the cult members raised a small wooden idol above their heads, their voices rising in a crescendo of eerie incantations. Sam's heart pounded in his chest as he witnessed the unthinkable. With a swift motion, they plunged a knife into the idol, causing dark, viscous liquid to flow from it. It looked like blood. Before Sam could react, one of the cult members turned, their hooded gaze locking onto him. Panic surged through him as their eerie chant turned into guttural cries of alarm. The cultists pointed in his direction, and in that moment he knew he had been spotted. Sam didn't wait to see what would happen next. He sprinted back along the trail, branches whipping at his face, his heart racing. He could hear the cultists' footsteps behind him, closing in fast. Fear gripped him as he desperately searched for a place to hide. Finding a thicket of dense underbrush, Sam dove in and held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. He prayed that they hadn't seen where he had gone. The cultists' footsteps grew louder, and he could hear their hushed voices as they searched for him. They couldn't have gone far. One of them muttered. "We must find them," another replied, their voice cold and determined. Sam's chest tightened as he realized the gravity of his situation. These people were dangerous, and he had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He had to get away and find help. Once the cultists moved on, Sam cautiously emerged from his hiding spot and continued his mad dash through the forest. He could hear their voices fading in the distance, and the sounds of their pursuit grew fainter. Eventually, he reached the ranger station, breathless and terrified. He stumbled inside, frantically trying to explain what he had seen to his fellow rangers. "You have to believe me," he pleaded, his voice quivering. "There's a cult in the woods, and they're doing something terrible." The other rangers exchanged worried glances but said nothing. One of them finally spoke up, a note of skepticism in his voice. "Sam, it's late, and you're clearly shaken. Maybe you just saw some campers having a late-night gathering. You know how people can be sometimes." But Sam knew what he had seen was real, and it was far from a harmless gathering of campers. The memory of the cult's sinister ritual was etched into his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something malevolent lurked in the heart of the forest. Over the next few days, Sam tried to gather evidence and convince his colleagues of the cult's existence, but his efforts were met with skepticism and dismissal. Nobody believed him, and he began to doubt his own sanity. Haunted by the memory of that night, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that the cult was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next opportunity to carry out their sinister deeds. And as the days turned into weeks, he couldn't escape the chilling realization that he was on his own, facing a horror that no one else believed in or understood. The Lost Hours, a tale of the Appalachian Abyss. The Appalachian Mountains had always called to Ethan, the lure of their rugged wilderness drawing him like a moth to a flame. He was an experienced adventurer, well prepared for his journey into the heart of these ancient peaks. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would encounter there. As he trekked deeper into the dense woods, the tall trees closed in around him, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows that danced in the fading light. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching his every move. The air grew colder and the silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. Ethan had been hiking for hours, and he had lost all sense of time and direction. He reached for his compass, only to find it spinning wildly, as if the very magnetic fields of the earth had gone haywire. Panic gnawed at the edges of his mind, but he shook it off. He was an experienced outdoorsman after all. He could handle a little disorientation. Night descended upon the forest like a shroud, and Ethan made camp in a small clearing. He set up his tent, built a fire, and tried to ignore the sense of unease that clung to him like a shadow. As he lay in his sleeping bag, he could have sworn he heard whispers in the wind, unintelligible voices that seemed to come from every direction. The next morning, Ethan awoke to find his campsite in disarray. His gear was scattered, and his fire had been extinguished. It was as if a whirlwind had torn through the clearing during the night. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that something was terribly wrong. Determined to press on, Ethan continued his hike through the unforgiving terrain. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was going in circles. He pulled out his map, but it offered no clarity. The landmarks and trails he had studied were nowhere to be found. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's supplies dwindled. He began to ration his food and water, but it was a losing battle. The forest seemed intent on trapping him, taunting him with glimpses of familiar landmarks that disappeared as soon as he approached. One night, as he huddled in his tent, Ethan heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps circling his campsite. Panic surged through him as he unzipped the tent and shone his flashlight into the darkness. But there was nothing there, just the oppressive silence of the forest. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. "Show yourself!" No response came, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he couldn't stay here any longer. He had to find a way out, to escape the clutches of this malevolent place. With renewed determination, he set off at dawn, pushing himself to the limits of his endurance. The forest seemed to respond, the very trees closing in around him, forming a suffocating canopy overhead. Ethan's body ached, and he knew he was running out of time. It was then that he saw it, a glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged within him as he stumbled toward it, breaking through the tree line to find himself standing on the edge of a road. A car approached, and Ethan waved it down, his voice hoarse from days of shouting. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stopped and rolled down the window. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. Ethan could hardly believe his luck. "I've been lost in these woods for weeks. You have to help me." The man nodded and opened the car door. "Get in, we'll get you to safety." As Ethan settled into the car, he couldn't help but glance back at the forest that had held him captive for so long. It was as if the very trees were retreating, their menacing presence fading into the distance. When they reached civilization, Ethan was shocked to discover that 3 months had passed since he had entered the Appalachian Mountains. It felt like only hours. He was emaciated, his clothes in tatters, but he was alive. He tried to explain his ordeal to the authorities, but his story was met with skepticism. They insisted that he had simply become disoriented in the woods and suffered from hallucinations. But Ethan knew the truth. He had been trapped in a nightmarish realm, hunted by something that defied explanation. To this day, he can't escape the memories of those harrowing months in the forest, and he can't shake the feeling that whatever had toyed with him in the Appalachian Mountains is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Thanks for watching. To support us, please like and subscribe.